Okay, so I have this setting this morning, which is the lobby of the Hotel Albuquerque, and you know, I came inside. It's very early. Conference is in full swing, and unlike some of my colleagues, I only end up sleeping a little bit, and that's okay by me. It's just 4 days of end-to-end action, so to speak. And I say that with the full awareness that if I were back home in Portland at this hour, I would be on the lacrosse field at the Riverside Athletic Center, which is what I usually do at this time. And so cheers to my my lax bros that are playing right now at the rack. So yesterday was kind of interesting because, I wanted to also say, so I moved inside, and just to sort of contextualize where we are in the meditations, we've been following the movement of Socrates in the symposium. He has moved into the home of Agathon and is now giving his speech, and we're looking at certain moments, certain pieces in the speech, fragments actually of the speech, and sort of folding those, or actually not folding them, we're sort of, I'm laying them alongside other moments in Socrates' appearances and rather other Platonic dialogues, one of them being the Protagoras, another one being the Apology, and some atmospheric sounds here in the hotel lobby, and so we're inside the house of Agathon. That's another reason why I thought it'd be kind of interesting to set this up here inside the hotel. The other one is that it's really kind of cool out at this hour. One of the interesting things about being here in the Southwest is that, given the latitude, the sun rises a little bit later than it does in Portland, Maine. So the sun definitely rises earlier in the morning in Portland. So yesterday I was saying it was kind of interesting because I recorded the daily meditation and did my commentary, and then I had my colleague Tyson Lewis come on later in the day, and we did sort of an interview. He did an interview with me, or we did a dialogue, really, is what it was. Not an interview, it was a dialogue, and it was a conversation. And that's the point, right? That we were sort of, authentically, or attempting to be authentic in our enactment of the philosophical dialogue. And Tyson was really helpful because he sort of guided me towards an interesting movement with the language, talking about being and learning, capital B, capital L, and then beings and learning. So we were able to articulate that in the course of the conversation. Later today, at about 12:30, I'm going to be recording an interview that Winston Thompson, is a colleague of mine, is going to be conducting for a project that he's up to, and I'll be documenting that as well with my own YouTube documentation, and it'll be sort of a recording of the recording. So the camera will be sort of set off to the side and taking in what the interview is between Winston and I. So further sort of conversations. Now, I suppose had I thought about it, and it's just dawning on me now, that one of the things I could have done, and maybe should have done at this conference, was to sit down with my colleagues and record vignettes and conversations. Of course, the thing that would really have been interesting, I think, would have been to have a sort of flip camera, or even this computer sort of documenting in sort of real time and raw time the conversations that we've been having here at the conference. And that there might be a TMI thing going on there a little bit, but okay, well, I better get going here because the vacuum cleaners are out, and so we're going to get some not so well, it's not going to sound as bucolic as it was when we were outside. This reminds me of a recording that I once heard of Bernstein, and I've mentioned it already in this blog, At Home with Bernstein. And so, it's Leonard Bernstein, the composer and the conductor, at home, and it's all audio, and he's practicing his piano, and then all of a sudden the vacuum cleaner goes off, and some kids are running through the room, and the doorbell rings, and they say, it's the pizza's here. So anyway, in the hallway here, in the lobby of the Hotel Albuquerque, picking it up on Poetic Phenomenological Meditation, I lost track, I think we're at number 32. And this is originally was recorded March 16th, 2004. So 10 years later to this day. Good morning, ladies. Okay, so those are some of my colleagues going out for a morning walk or run. Okay, so let's pick it up where we left off. We've learned from the legend of Socrates, in all its forms, that Socrates, the teacher who lets nothing else happen but learning, was put underway by the recurring message he received from the gods. These recurring messages were received as if from within a dream, as Socrates suggests in Symposium, but many arrived in the form of dreams. He recounts the various forms of his messages in Phaedo. He says, "It is like this, you see. In the course of my life, I have often had the same dream appearing in different forms at different times, but always saying the same thing. Socrates, practice and cultivate the arts." Regardless of the forms these messages took, Socrates seems to have deciphered them within the same framework of learning, the doctrina he received from Diotima. Her teaching left him with the one and only truth he confesses to have known, and from this, a tentative conviction about how he might undertake his wandering. This tentative conviction, undertaken always under the influence of questionableness, was more than a fool's motivation to get going, but far less than a commander's determination to move forward with full speed. It is the very tentativity of the conviction that gives birth to the various legends and to Socrates' own changes of heart in how he should proceed. Regardless of the different paths he took, he was certain that he should never wander alone. Even the approaching moment of his departure in the Phaedo is endured cheerfully, with tranquility and calm, for, quote, "a man who has devoted his life to philosophy should be cheerful in the face of death, and confident of finding the greatest blessing in the next world when his life on earth is finished." It's from the Phaedo, line 64a. His bearing up to death is endured with the promise that he will continue in his journey with others who have gone on before him. How much would one of you give to meet Orpheus and Musaeus, Hesiod and Homer? I'm willing to die 10 times over if this account is true. It would be a especially interesting experience for me to join them in there. And that's from the Apology, 41a. Thus, the certainty of the way he wandered was rooted in his understanding that the message, practice and cultivate the arts, meant for him to practice the art of friendship. This art also can be called the art of teaching or letting learning happen. Through this art, we are held out together for questioning and in a way make meaning together. The essence of thinking is dialogic precisely because it is the practice of giving and receiving. Thinking is the passing of the cup and offering one's fullest attention to others so as to receive their saying, their voice as the already not yet. To be released from one's own voice is to become reposed in the hearing of the other. To hear is not simply to listen, as in the reception of meaningless sounds. To hear is to receive meaning from the other. That's the alarm that was supposed to wake me up. Let me go back and read that. To hear is not simply to listen, as in the reception of meaningless sounds. And the coincidence of that is just kind of ridiculous, actually. But so it is, lots of coincidence. To hear is to receive meaning from the other. But this meaning is offered and received over the profound gap that opens up between beings and makes possible their being together. This profound gap both draws together and separates them. It is the condition for the possibility of the horizon which joins them as a congregation. This gap is the nameless beyond, the ultimate context. This gap appears to us in the practice of this art in our wandering, in the exchange of words. As we said above, an abyss appears in the saying of Wu Yi Wu, in the abusis. Abusis, without busis, depth, bottomless, profound, and unfathomable primeval chaos. The giving and receiving of sayings is exchanged over this abyss. In passing over the nothing, In passing over the abyss, the saying takes on the character of the question. This saying is held out to the nothing and becomes questionable. In becoming questionable, the saying appears as possibility, as interpretable. We receive the message and become interpreters of the interpreters. The gift is offered and received as possibility, as questionable, as poetic. The exchange of sayings is the giving and receiving of poetic thinking. Evocative speech is the sharing and passing of poetic thinking. We fill and empty the cup of meaning by offering and receiving one another's words, expressions, ways of being in the world. Quote, as destiny that sends truth, being remains concealed, but the world's destiny is heralded in poetry. We have gathered from hearing the various versions of the legends. What we have gathered from hearing the various versions of the legends is that in the end, Socrates' particular form of wisdom is a wisdom rooted and taking form within the ground of poetic thinking, in the raising and exploring of unanswerable questions which we have the urgent need to pose and the pathos to endure. But these questions are not ends in and for themselves. Rather, they are an expression of the particularly meaningful way we move together. This movement, which we have named learning, teaching, has been described as a purposeful wandering, peregrinatio. To wander in this way, to practice the art of cultivating friendship, is to plant together the seeds of community and to reap the harvest of the fellowship between all beings. The one who knows the truth of this art proceeds from the certainty of their relationship with being. Such a one is moved by the desire to offer their teachability in the posing of unanswerable questions. This sort of person has a passion for the impossible, a desire to endure the impossible, to give and receive meaning over the profound, bottomless, unfathomable wu-e-wu. This sort of person has been called teacher, sage, and that's where it ends. So a couple of things I want to point out is that this was one of the longer meditations that had a decent pace to it and did a nice sort of beginning, middle, and end, right? So it had this sense of a completion within it. And as I sort of said at the pre-commentary, in this movement through the symposium, we sort of stop, as Socrates did, as mentioned in the meditation that happened a couple days ago, where we were looking at Socrates' removal into the porch. And so we stepped off from the actual exploration of the symposium and went back to these legends of Socrates. And went back to the Phaedo, to the line of the music-making Socrates, of the dream figure, of the line, Socrates, practice and cultivate the arts. Good morning. The other, and so going back to that in the beginning and at the end, and sort of trying to understand now how his particular cultivation of the arts was then a music-making philosophy, but always a music-making philosophy that was happening with friends. So his wasn't a solo performance, if you will. His was something that happened in the form of duos and trios and quartets and whatnot. So this is important. And what's important now is also the bringing together of that line, Socrates practice and cultivate the arts, and layering that with the teaching he received from Diotima. So that's important too. And so further, I would add, is this discussion of the practice of the art as a kind of peripatetic. Peripatetic, or peripatia, is this idea taken from the manner in which Aristotle and his students practiced philosophy, which was a walking and talking. And so what's a sort of the legend of the peripatetics is that as opposed to the school of Plato, or perhaps it was happening in the school, the legend goes, as opposed to sitting and sort of dwelling together, they moved together. So one can liken that to a movement away from the academy or a movement within the academy. So moving the academy, that's what's called Plato's Academy, is the sort of formal title. So moving the academy, insofar as they're moving within it, or moving beyond it, that is literally outside of it. In either way, there's this sense that in the peripatetic tradition, movement is key to the emergence of philosophy. So I sort of, get into this idea of movement and philosophy as something that emerges in this movement together, in this wandering, this purposeful wandering. Now, at that point, I talk about, and I return to this idea of the movement, this purposeful movement, as something of not just a wandering, but also a kind of a pilgrimage. So I go back and recall this, the Latin word for that, which is peregrinatio, which is the peregrino, which is the pilgrim. And so I say that the movement, the way we move together, this movement, which we have named learning teaching, has been described as a purposeful wandering. And so purposeful wandering then is different from just wandering, because it has intention. I'm sort of playing with this idea of the fixed end, right? So a pilgrim is moving towards and along paths that have already been moved, and they're moving towards an end point, which is a holy site. And so the pilgrim is called to the holy site, is actually instructed by the teaching of their order, or of their organization, their religion, their school, to make a pilgrimage, which is to go to a particular holy site or a very powerful site, a site of both the origin of the school, or the order, or the religion, that both is a site of its origin, but also of its renewal. So and the arrival of the pilgrims each year is a way that site becomes re-energized, and also energizes and re-energizes the pilgrims. So there's a sort of meeting of the spirit. But there's also a sense, and Chaucer demonstrated this in a sort of comical way with his Canterbury Tales. There's also an important sense in which the pilgrimage, el camino, the walk, is one that is full of significance and full of the power of the meaning, or the spirit, or the history of the endpoint. So that the end, where one is going in terms of one's pilgrimage, is always there within the movement of the pilgrim, of the wandering. So purposeful wandering here then is a way in which one is moving towards an endpoint, which is the end of the pilgrimage, but with a purposeful wandering, the emphasis is placed on the movement all along the way being meaningful. So there isn't a fixed point, but there is intention, and the intention, in a way, is the fixed point that is moving constantly with the wandering. So, and this fixed point, if you will, is the intentional community. It's the conversation happening with the friends. It's the dialogue that is bringing together the community. And this is why I emphasize that this purposeful wandering is something that's happening together with others. So there's a certain togetherness that I'm trying to emphasize, I think, in this particular meditation, that has to do with the togetherness of being and learning, the togetherness that one has with being, as the primary or fundamental ontology of the human condition. I talked about that in my discussion with Tyson. And then there is the being together with the world, and so learning as a kind of making of things, and that those making of things is a mediation of one's relationship with being, so that the excess, right, that one takes up and makes sense of of that is spilling over of being, which we talked about, and I talk about, is a contribution to the world, so the being with the world. And then there's the being together with others. And in the being with others, then, is the significant practice of the conversation, where one is mediating the encounter with being through dialogue and through conversation with one's friends. And so that the community of friendship, then, is a community that is sort of intentionally made. And so you have learning community and being with others, being with other friends, and then building community. And then you have being with the excess of being, which then is the being with the world and the contribution of making of stuff. And then you have of course, the sort of fundamental ontology of being with being, and that's the learning. So the last point I want to make is that in terms of the production of this printout, the original typing out and printing of this, when I went back, I made a note here, and I blocked out, it says the sage. And so what's interesting is I was trying to go back and edit. I was trying to figure out, how am I going to organize this? How am I going to put all this stuff together? Ultimately, the stuff that I'm reading now became chapter 2, Socrates. But the figure of the sage became something that was very significant and very important. And they... I don't know if that was a coincidence that when I started to talk about the sage, the lights dimmed, but I was attuned to that. Now I'm sort of in the shadows. That the figure of the sage I sort of highlighted that, but I wasn't quite sure how that was going to figure in. And the sage, the meditation I did yesterday, the word sage, the German word Saga, so like in conversation with Heidegger, which is saying, and then the sage as this primary figure in Lao Tzu's work, is a kind of complicated and in some ways problematic figure for me, because on the one hand, I sort of want to talk about the gathering, friends. When you're with other friends, you're not no one is sort of standing out as the sort of hierarchical being. That's I think why for Arendt, friendship is so significant, because there's this inherent sense of equality. That's not to say that there's a power, but when you're with friends, the power that's gathering one together, if you will, there's also sort of a power of the principle of equality. I mean, when you're with friends, there's a sort of equalizing force, which is both, a sense of sameness, right? That you're all sort of together in this community of a friendship, and you're the same in that you're all friends, so you inhabit this place that you all share, which is friendship. But there's also sort of the equality of, in a sort of standard horizontal way, where one is all together equal. Right? And there isn't one person who is standing out as hierarchically above the rest. So then how does the sage figure into this? Because the sage is very much the figure of the one who has more experience. With the wisdom of the sage is meaning that they have lived longer, and in Eastern culture, and for China in particular, there is the sort of elder wisdom of the elder, so the one who has just been on the earth longer and has attained more wisdom. And it's actually the same in Rome, in the Roman culture. The elder has the wisdom, right? Why is that? Well, they're closer to the origin in a certain sense, but also they have the experience, so there's an experiential wisdom that they have. So in a certain sense, then, I have to sort of address this issue of the complexity of the sage as the one who is unable to, who is able and who is pushing forward the conversation, but who is also a friend. So how is the sage both a member of the learning community, insofar as the learning community is a gathering of friends, but at the same time, in some ways, the wise one, the older one? So I think I'll leave it at that, and that's going to be it for the meditation from this day, March 16th, originally written March 16th, 2004, read today, March 16th, 2014.